I never thought a simple email could make me laugh out loud, but the one from Margot Emerson did exactly that. No gatherings over 20 people. Violations will be enforced immediately. Just 20 people. That was her limit, and she thought she could control my rooftop party for 100 guests. She didn't know me. She didn't know the pinnacle, my private helipad, or that rules were only suggestions for someone who loves bending them. The moment I read that email, I knew exactly how this night would go, and it had nothing to do with compliance. Margot Emerson had just triggered a plan that she would never forget. I'm Alex Carter, 48, and apparently the ultimate nightmare for HOA tyrants everywhere. I wear my casual luxury like armor, a designer t-shirt, tailored pants, sneakers that have carried me across rooftops and boardrooms alike. I thrive on turning authority upside down, especially when it's wielded by people like Margot, ruthless, cold, and absolutely convinced they are untouchable. Tonight, I had everything I needed: strategy, allies, and the perfect location to turn a simple rule into a spectacle. I glanced over at the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the pinnacle, Miami's golden sunset reflecting in the water, and I smiled. This wasn't just a party, it was a statement, a lesson in humility for anyone who thought they owned the rules. Before things get going, a quick question. Where are you watching this right now? On your phone, tablet, or computer? If you love seeing a daring takeover of HOA tyranny, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps make sure you don't miss the chaos that's about to unfold. No pressure, just a small click to stay in the front row of this story. Planning a rooftop party for 100 people when the HOA wants to enforce a 20-person limit requires precision. My team was already in motion. Leo Kim had drones set up to monitor all angles of the rooftop, streaming live video to make sure we caught every reaction from below. Sofia Rivera was coordinating communications and media contacts, ready in case the story needed to spread wider than just our building. Jasmine Patel was helping me ensure every angle looked spectacular. She loved stirring the pot and watching chaos unfold in style. Every detail mattered because tonight, Margot Emerson's power would stop at the curb. The first helicopter arrived just as the sky turned a deep orange, its rotors slicing the warm Miami air. Guests disembarked, laughter spilling into the breeze, champagne glasses sparkling like stars reflected on the ocean. The music started low, pulsing just enough to hint at energy without overwhelming conversation. I moved among the arrivals, checking that everything aligned with the plan. Every table, every corner, every camera placement was accounted for. Margot Emerson and her husband, Ethan Emerson, could threaten, email, or yell, but they couldn't step onto my rooftop without turning themselves into a spectacle. Ethan, ambitious but easily embarrassed, had already started sending frantic texts to Margot. "We should enforce the rules, now." I chuckled quietly, picturing him pacing in his crisp blazer, trying to intimidate guests who had no idea they were being observed. The two of them thought they had authority, but the moment they tried to enforce it on this rooftop, they'd realize how powerless they truly were. I walked to the center of the rooftop, feeling the glass railing under my hands, overlooking the gathering crowd. There was something satisfying in seeing every aspect of my plan come alive. The drones capturing every angle, guests laughing, the sun casting a golden glow across the terrace. My eyes flicked toward the ocean, imagining Margot pacing in her office, furious and helpless, her emails becoming more desperate with each passing minute. Every word she typed was another reminder that she couldn't touch me here. The layout of the pinnacle was perfect for this kind of defiance. 2 helipads allowed waves of guests to arrive discreetly and dramatically, while retractable sunshades provided flexibility for lighting and visibility. Every step of the night had been orchestrated to show off the luxury and control I wielded, and to make Margot Emerson seethe with envy and frustration. I had set up small checkpoints, discreet signs, and cameras to ensure that if anyone from the HOA tried to approach, they'd be caught on film, visible to everyone on the rooftop and beyond. Guests mingled effortlessly, some moving toward the bar, others checking out the ocean view, while the first musical notes from the playlist created a soft, energizing pulse. I circulated, greeting friends and coordinating with Leo, who was monitoring drone feeds, and Sophia, who was texting media contacts to prepare for any HOA intervention. This wasn't just a party. It was a carefully executed demonstration of cleverness and audacity. Margot's emails continued to pour in, increasingly frantic. "This is illegal. Immediate compliance is required." I laughed aloud at the thought of her imagining 100 guests navigating a rooftop, arriving by helicopter, while she sat trapped below in her cold office. She didn't understand that tonight was about showing her the limits of her power. Rules could intimidate most people, but not when you own the strategy, the space, and the audience. As darkness fell, the rooftop transformed into a glowing spectacle. Warm lights lined the edges of the terrace, reflecting off the ocean and illuminating faces in a golden halo. The helicopter made its final approach, dropping the last wave of arrivals who stepped onto the terrace with awe, instantly absorbed by the energy and beauty of the setting. Music began to pulse stronger, laughter grew louder, and the scene took on a cinematic quality I had imagined for weeks. From my position near the railing, I observed everything: the crowd moving fluidly, guests enjoying themselves, cameras capturing every detail, and drones hovering silently above. This was my domain. Every element of the night had been meticulously planned, yet it appeared effortless. Margot Emerson and her husband Ethan could do nothing but watch helplessly from below, their authority evaporating in the warm Miami night air. Even now, as the party buzzed with life, I could feel the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. The first signs of HOA panic were evident in the flurry of texts and calls Margot sent to Ethan, which he read with increasing frustration, his face growing red under the dim lights of their office. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, everything flowed seamlessly, a mixture of celebration, luxury, and the quiet thrill of revenge being served with style. Guests were fully immersed in the experience, some laughing, some taking in the ocean view, and others marveling at the ingenuity of the setup. Every element, the helicopters, the lighting, the subtle music, the discreet surveillance, worked together to create a narrative of power reversed. Tonight, Margot Emerson was powerless, and I was in complete control. By the time the first hour had passed, the rooftop was alive with movement, the ocean reflecting the vibrant lights, and the city far below glimmering like a distant constellation. Every guest played a part in the spectacle, unknowingly participating in an elaborate lesson for the HOA tyrants. They would see, eventually, that influence has limits, and creativity can outshine authority. I stood there, letting the night settle, feeling the breeze, hearing the soft laughter, and watching my plan unfold flawlessly. 100 people, one rooftop, and a lesson in humility for anyone who dared to dictate rules without understanding the scope of the game. This was just the beginning, and the air was thick with promise. Tonight, the pinnacle would be remembered, not as a site for compliance, but as the stage where rules were broken, audacity reigned, and revenge was served with style. The night settled over the pinnacle like a velvet curtain, but the energy on the rooftop refused to fade. Guests had arrived in waves, some stepping down from the helicopter with exhilaration, others arriving by private cars, all of them marveling at the tropical Miami skyline stretching endlessly before them. The ocean reflected the city lights, and the warm breeze carried laughter, the faint scent of salt water, and the subtle hum of music that pulsed just beneath the surface, like a heartbeat syncing with the crowd. Everything had been planned to perfection, yet it felt entirely spontaneous, the kind of effortless chaos that makes people feel alive. I moved among the guests, watching them take in the view, chatting, taking photos, and sipping champagne. From the corner of my eye, I could see the drones hovering, capturing every moment, streaming live to our private feed. Leo Kim's precision had paid off. Every angle, every rooftop entry point, every guest interaction was visible. I smiled to myself, knowing that the HOA below had no idea how orchestrated this all was. Margot Emerson could send 100 angry emails, but she could not enforce a single rule up here. Ethan Emerson, her husband, had already arrived in person at the building entrance, pacing and muttering as he tried to gauge the situation. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Margot, each one more frantic than the last. "This is outrageous. They can't do this," he read aloud to no one in particular, his voice tinged with embarrassment. I imagined Margot's face on the other end, red with fury, realizing that her perfect little empire of HOA control was crumbling. powerless against a well-planned rooftop rebellion. The first helicopter lifted off after dropping its guests, only to be replaced by another, bringing a second wave of arrivals. Their laughter and excitement filled the air as they stepped onto the terrace, each one adding to the illusion of chaos. I moved toward the center of the rooftop, surveying the scene. Tables had been arranged for maximum effect, cocktail tables near the bar, small seating clusters for conversation, and cameras discreetly positioned to capture every interaction. Music played softly but deliberately, creating a rhythm that subtly guided the flow of the party without anyone noticing. Sofia Rivera was coordinating the live feed, subtly directing attention to key moments. "Alex, camera 3 is clear. Focus on the north helipad. They're arriving now," she whispered through my earpiece. I nodded, knowing that the HOA had no way of knowing what they were missing. The irony was delicious. Every rule they thought they had enforced was being violated in plain sight, yet they were completely blind to it. Guests began to explore the edge of the rooftop, marveling at the ocean view, and I noticed a few of the more daring attendees leaning out slightly, taking in the breeze, taking selfies, and posting them to social media. The subtle sense of rebellion, the thrill of doing something technically forbidden, added an extra layer of excitement. I felt a rush of satisfaction. This wasn't just a party, it was a statement, a carefully crafted act of defiance, designed to humiliate Margot Emerson and prove that creativity and audacity always outshine bureaucracy. Then came the first direct challenge. Margot's minion, a flustered HOA board member, had attempted to enter the building lobby, presumably intending to confront Ethan or find some way onto the rooftop. I watched through the drone feed as he arrived at the elevator, only to be politely but firmly stopped by security. My plan had accounted for every contingency. They could threaten, plead, or beg, but no one was getting upstairs without authorization. Their authority ended at the doors. The next hour passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell like waves, and the setting sun gave way to a warm, moonlit glow over the ocean. The rooftop had been transformed into a stage for rebellion, each guest playing their part without even realizing it. I could see Margot Emerson pacing in her office below, her hands clenched, her face a mask of fury, while Ethan tried in vain to assert control over a situation that had long escaped them. Every frantic email, every failed phone call, every frustrated attempt to intervene was a small victory in my silent war. At the bar, I joined Leo and Sophia for a quick check-in. "All cameras in place?" I asked. "Every angle," Leo confirmed, fingers flying across the tablet. "Live feed is perfect. HOA won't see a thing until it's too late." Sophia smiled. "And everyone's posting, just like we planned. Margot is going to be mortified when this goes viral." I chuckled, knowing that viral wasn't our main goal. Embarrassment and power reversal were far more satisfying. Guests started gravitating toward the helipad, some curious, some daring, wanting a better view of the city lights and ocean horizon. The arrival of the helicopters became part of the entertainment, the momentary pause in the music creating anticipation, and the boarding and disembarking of guests was choreographed like a high-stakes dance. Every camera angle, every shadow, every reflection was accounted for. The sense of control was intoxicating, and I savored it, knowing that each movement was a reminder of the power I held over a situation that had been threatened by a petty HOA email. As the night deepened, a gentle wind carried the scent of the ocean across the terrace, mingling with the faint aroma of cocktails and appetizers. Guests were oblivious to the HOA below, caught up in the thrill of breaking unspoken rules, the elegance of the setting, and the subtle thrill of doing something audacious. I stood at the edge, looking out over the ocean, feeling the breeze ruffle my hair, and let the satisfaction sink in. Everything had unfolded exactly as I had envisioned. Meanwhile, the HOA's attempts escalated. Margot Emerson had finally called the building manager, demanding that all rooftop activity cease immediately. Ethan paced in the lobby, red-faced and muttering under his breath, but there was nothing they could do. Security had been instructed to follow only my explicit directions, and every point of potential access was monitored. Their authority had no reach here. They were powerless, and I reveled in it. By the time the second hour approached, the rooftop was alive with energy. 100 people enjoying the view, the music, and the thrill of being part of a perfectly orchestrated spectacle. Helicopters continued to arrive and depart, guests rotated in waves, and every moment was captured through drones and cameras strategically placed for maximum effect. The sense of freedom, control, and subtle defiance was palpable. I moved among the guests, exchanging brief words and checking in with my team. Every smile, every cheer, every moment of awe was a reminder that this was more than a party. It was a carefully executed lesson in the limits of authority, a demonstration that planning, creativity, and audacity could outmaneuver even the most overbearing HOA. Margot Emerson and her husband Ethan could protest, send emails, or stomp their feet in frustration, but they could not touch this rooftop, and that reality was delicious. As the moon rose high over the pinnacle, the party reached a rhythm of effortless motion. Guests laughed, danced, took in the view, and marveled at the audacity of the event. My allies moved seamlessly among them, ensuring everything ran smoothly, capturing every moment for posterity. And as I watched, leaning against the glass railing, the warm breeze on my face, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The night was unfolding exactly as planned, and the HOA, who had thought they could control everything, were completely irrelevant in this space. This rooftop, these guests, and the meticulous planning were proof that strategy and courage always outmatch bureaucracy and fear. Tonight, Margot Emerson would learn that no amount of rules or authority could stand in the way of someone willing to plan boldly and execute flawlessly. The first wave of her attempts to intervene had already failed spectacularly, and the evening was just getting started. The music shifted subtly as the night deepened, the beat growing stronger without overwhelming conversation, a rhythm that seemed to mirror my own pulse. Guests had begun exploring every corner of the pinnacle rooftop, some gravitating toward the ocean view edge, others clustering near the bar or the helipad, excitement palpable in every movement. I moved among them, observing the effortless flow of the party, every laugh, every glance, every raised glass a small victory against the petty bureaucracy below. The golden lights reflected in their eyes, the ocean's gentle waves far below creating a backdrop that seemed almost unreal, like a movie set. The second wave of helicopters had arrived, each landing precise and dramatic, adding to the spectacle. Guests disembarked with a mixture of awe and thrill, and I could see them immediately snapping photos and videos, sharing their excitement in real time. Every post, every story, every photo only amplified the humiliation of the HOA tyrants below. I imagined Margot Emerson pacing in her office, furious, imagining the chaos, feeling powerless as she typed yet another futile email demanding compliance. Her words had weight on paper, but on this rooftop, her authority was nothing more than a whisper, drowned by the laughter and music above. Ethan Emerson tried to rally security, but each attempt was met with polite firmness. The team I had assembled, Sophia, Leo, Jasmine, worked seamlessly, orchestrating every detail, ensuring that the HOA could not intervene without creating a public spectacle that would make them look ridiculous. Every potential point of entry was guarded, every camera angle monitored. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Their authority extended only as far as the lobby. Beyond that, they were powerless, trapped outside their self-made fortress of rules. Guests began to interact more, testing the boundaries of the space with playful audacity. Some moved close to the helipads, peering over the edge at the city lights and ocean horizon, while others explored the lounge areas I had arranged with deliberate care. The subtle thrill of bending invisible rules added a layer of excitement, an unspoken understanding among the crowd that this was not just a party, it was a carefully orchestrated act of rebellion. Every movement, every glance, every laugh served as a reminder that the HOA had overestimated its influence. From my vantage point near the railing, I noticed the first signs of marginal panic below. A building manager had been summoned, and 2 board members had arrived at the lobby, trying to gain information, but every approach was carefully neutralized. They could not ascend without permission, and even if they did, the layout of the rooftop ensured their presence would be obvious, broadcast by drones and cameras. Their frustration was a silent symphony, playing in stark contrast to the music and laughter above. The party began to evolve. Small groups gathered near the edge, marveling at the view, while others gravitated to the bar for cocktails and conversation. I moved fluidly among the guests, exchanging words, ensuring the energy remained high without ever appearing to control it. The illusion of spontaneity was key, allowing the party to feel effortless while every detail had been meticulously planned. I could see Sophia coordinating discrete camera angles, Leo signaling drone positions, and Jasmine subtly guiding guests toward areas where their interactions would create the most impact on both the live feed and social media. Helicopters continued to arrive in timed intervals, adding drama and excitement. Each guest disembarking was greeted with laughter and applause, their awe a silent message to the HOA below. Rules could be bent, boundaries ignored, and authority defied. The flow of arrivals became part of the entertainment, each landing choreographed to create anticipation and spectacle. I watched it unfold, the satisfaction of the plan's precision settling in like a warm tide. Meanwhile, Margot's emails had escalated in tone, demanding immediate compliance, threatening fines, even invoking supposed legal consequences. Ethan read them aloud in the lobby, his voice tight with embarrassment and fury, but their words carried no power here. Every step, every decision, every interaction on the rooftop reinforced the reality that the HOA could only bark from below. They had authority on paper, but execution was another matter entirely, and tonight, that execution was firmly out of their reach. As the night progressed, I decided it was time to introduce a subtle twist. Small, elegant displays of pyrotechnics were scheduled along the edge of the terrace, creating bursts of light and color against the darkening ocean. The effect was immediate. Guests paused, mouths open in awe, cameras raised to capture every moment. It was not dangerous, just dramatic enough to create a sense of spectacle, and it reinforced the power of planning, creativity, and audacity. The reaction was exactly what I had anticipated: laughter, awe, and quiet admiration, all unnoticed by the HOA below, who could only imagine chaos but had no means of influencing it. Security remained a careful presence, discreet but effective. Every access point was controlled, every movement monitored, ensuring that the only way onto the rooftop was through the helicopters or authorized entries. The crowd remained oblivious to the underlying orchestration, fully immersed in the thrill of audacious freedom. I walked along the edge, greeting friends, nodding to allies, observing drones in perfect formation above, and feeling the quiet satisfaction of total control. Ethan made one final attempt to intervene, approaching the lobby manager directly, trying to demand that the rooftop activity cease immediately. His voice was firm but futile, his authority nullified by careful planning and the unmistakable fact that he could not reach the location he sought to control. I imagined Margot screaming instructions into his phone, her fury tangible even at a distance. I allowed myself another quiet smile, knowing that their frustration was a direct consequence of their overreach, and the lesson was unfolding beautifully. By the third hour, the rooftop had settled into a rhythm of effortless motion. Guests danced, mingled, marveled at the ocean view, and occasionally paused to watch the dramatic landing or takeoff of a helicopter. Each moment reinforced the audacity of the plan, the sense of power reversal, and the stark contrast between those enjoying freedom above and the powerless HOA below. My team worked seamlessly, orchestrating every detail without ever appearing to do so. Every laugh, every glance, every photo shared online was another nail in the coffin of Margot Emerson's perceived control. The night air grew cooler, but the energy never waned. I allowed myself to lean against the railing for a moment, watching the lights of Miami twinkle in the distance, the ocean stretching endlessly below. The party had evolved into something greater than mere defiance. It had become a statement, a visible, undeniable lesson in strategy, planning, and the limits of authority. Every guest was part of that lesson, oblivious to the careful orchestration, their enjoyment perfectly synchronized with the revenge unfolding below. Margot Emerson and Ethan were now fully invested, sending increasingly frantic messages and calls, but the rooftop remained untouchable, a fortress of freedom and carefully curated spectacle. Every plan I had laid out was working flawlessly. Every wave of guests, every drone angle, every subtle light and sound contributing to the narrative of audacious triumph. By now it was clear. The HOA had no power here, no means of interference, and the night was mine. And yet, despite all the meticulous planning, I felt a thrill. The sense of control, the subtle tension in knowing they could do nothing, the satisfaction of orchestrating the impossible. These were the elements that made this rooftop rebellion not just a party, but a statement. As the helicopters continued their rotations, the music pulsed, and the crowd moved seamlessly across the terrace. I allowed myself a deep breath, savoring the success and anticipating the next phase. Tonight, the pinnacle was more than a venue. It was a monument to audacity, a stage where clever planning and fearless execution had completely outmaneuvered bureaucracy, and a vivid lesson that authority means nothing without reach. By the time the fourth hour rolled around, the rooftop had transformed into a spectacle that few could have imagined. The pinnacle gleamed under the Miami night sky, lights reflecting off the ocean in rippling patterns, while the sound of laughter, conversation, and subtle music blended into a rhythm that felt alive. Guests had settled into the energy of the evening, some exploring every corner, others leaning over the edge to feel the thrill of altitude, and all of them completely immersed in an experience that was as audacious as it was luxurious. The helicopters continued to arrive and depart with precision, each arrival timed to add drama and flair, and every guest disembarking was met with cheers and applause, reinforcing the feeling that this rooftop was a domain of freedom, not rules. From my position near the railing, I could see Margot Emerson's influence beginning to crumble entirely. Her texts and emails had escalated from polite demands to furious threats, her language growing desperate and almost incoherent. Ethan Emerson, attempting to assert authority on her behalf, looked increasingly uncomfortable, pacing in the lobby, as though sheer force of will could somehow reach the rooftop. He was powerless, and that realization made the sight of him muttering into his phone all the more satisfying. My team had anticipated every move. Security controlled all access points, drones monitored every angle, and the guests were so engaged that no one noticed the careful choreography keeping the HOA at bay. I called Leo Kim over to the tablet, nodding toward the north helipad. "Keep the drones hovering. I want a full view of any movement from below. If they try anything, we'll capture it all." His fingers flew across the controls, repositioning cameras and checking the live feeds. Sofia Rivera was coordinating social media and media contacts in real time, making sure that any minor slip by the HOA would be amplified, all while maintaining the illusion of spontaneity for our guests. Jasmine Patel moved among the crowd subtly, guiding people toward the areas where cameras and drones would capture the most dynamic footage. Everything was precise, invisible, yet perfectly staged. The guests were blissfully unaware of the power struggle unfolding below, their excitement feeding the spectacle. Some had started a casual competition on the helipad, taking turns posing for photos against the dramatic skyline, while others clustered near the edge to watch the ocean below shimmer under the moonlight. The energy was intoxicating, a mixture of thrill and elegance, and I moved through it like a conductor guiding an orchestra, subtle cues keeping the rhythm perfect. Every laugh, every cheer, every raised glass was a note in a symphony of revenge. It was time for the first real stunt. I signaled to Leo and Sophia, and within moments, small coordinated bursts of light flickered along the perimeter of the terrace. Not pyrotechnics, not dangerous, just elegant, choreographed lighting that reflected off the ocean and the glass railings, creating the illusion of a dramatic cascade of sparks. Guests paused in awe, phones raised, capturing the moment, and I could see the impact even from the rooftop edge. The perfect blend of surprise and spectacle. Margot Emerson, watching from her office, could only imagine the chaos, powerless to intervene. Ethan, trying to maintain some sense of control, approached a security guard in the lobby, insisting that the rooftop activity cease immediately. His voice was tight, his tone increasingly frantic, but every attempt was neutralized politely but firmly. The plan had accounted for him, just as it had accounted for every potential intruder, and his frustration only added to the thrill. The reality was clear. This rooftop was untouchable, and every failed attempt by the HOA reinforced the power reversal I had orchestrated. As the evening progressed, the crowd's excitement continued to build. Helicopters rotated arrivals and departures seamlessly, and guests explored every corner of the terrace. The music shifted slightly, a subtle change designed to elevate the mood without overpowering conversation, while the lighting adjusted to accentuate the depth of the ocean view and the silhouettes of the city skyline. Every detail had been planned to create a sense of effortless luxury, of audacious fun, while maintaining complete control over the environment. I moved closer to the center, surveying the scene. The reaction of the guests was exactly what I had envisioned. Awe, laughter, excitement, and a hint of playful daring. They leaned over railings, posed for photos, and occasionally gestured toward the helicopters in amazement. Every action, every gesture, every delighted expression was a reinforcement of the lesson being silently taught to the HOA below. Authority means nothing when it is not enforced with reach, strategy, and precision. Margot Emerson's emails had shifted again, now demanding proof of compliance and threatening fines. Ethan read them aloud, voice cracking slightly under the pressure, and I allowed myself a small smile. Their attempts at intimidation were impotent. Every drone angle, every controlled security checkpoint, every guest who entered and exited according to plan was another silent victory. The night was unfolding exactly as I had orchestrated. It was time to escalate the spectacle. I signaled subtly to Leo, and the drones adjusted, creating a moving visual frame that captured multiple helicopters arriving simultaneously. Guests noticed, raising glasses and cheering, their energy feeding the dynamic of the rooftop, unaware that every reaction had been choreographed for maximum impact. The visual was stunning. City lights reflected on the ocean, helicopters descending like controlled fireworks, guests posing in the golden glow of the terrace lights. The effect was immediate, electric, and utterly disorienting for the HOA below, who had no way to interact with or stop it. Sophia coordinated quietly, ensuring that any attempted interference would be broadcast instantly. A minor misstep by one of the board members outside the building would appear exaggerated through the drone's perspective, further reinforcing the sense of helplessness and humiliation. Every detail had been considered, every possible move preempted. Margot Emerson, if she could see it, was powerless. Ethan's red face in the lobby was proof enough. Guests moved freely, some daring to approach the very edges of the rooftop, feeling the height, marveling at the view, and capturing every moment. The subtle thrill of bending unspoken rules gave the gathering a sense of audacious energy, a quiet rebellion against authority, and a perfect lesson in control. I moved among them, occasionally nodding to allies or adjusting minor details, maintaining the illusion of spontaneity while everything unfolded exactly as planned. By the 5th hour, the rooftop had reached a rhythm of effortless motion. Helicopters came and went with precision. The lighting created an almost cinematic effect, and the crowd's energy surged without any coordination beyond subtle cues from my team. Laughter, cheers, camera clicks, and the faint hum of the ocean blended into a soundtrack of triumph. Margot Emerson and Ethan could scream, threaten, or rage. Their power stopped at the building's entrance, irrelevant to the spectacle unfolding above. I stood near the railing, taking a quiet moment to absorb the scene. Guests laughed and danced, explored, and marveled, oblivious to the strategy behind the spectacle. The moon reflected off the ocean in ripples. The city lights twinkled like a constellation, and the helicopters added intermittent bursts of drama. Every moment reinforced the central lesson. Clever planning, audacity, and control over one's environment can utterly outmatch rigid authority. Even as the evening continued, I could feel the satisfaction of total control. Margot Emerson's attempts to interfere had failed spectacularly, her influence non-existent, and Ethan's futile posturing only added to the quiet thrill of victory. This was no longer just a party. It was a statement, a living lesson, a carefully orchestrated spectacle of audacious defiance. The pinnacle had become a stage, and every guest a performer, unwittingly participating in the triumph over bureaucracy and petty rules. The night had reached a level of energy that was both thrilling and intoxicating. The pinnacle's rooftop was alive with movement, laughter, and the soft pulse of music that seemed to sync perfectly with the city lights below. Guests were fully immersed, some standing at the edge, marveling at the ocean waves shimmering in the moonlight, others clustered near the bar or taking photos on the helipad. Every detail of the night had been orchestrated to maximize awe and excitement, yet it felt completely spontaneous. I moved among the crowd, smiling at the delight on everyone's faces, knowing that each laugh, each raised glass, each surprised gasp was part of the subtle humiliation being administered to Margot Emerson and her husband Ethan below. Helicopters continued their rotations, bringing waves of guests in a controlled spectacle that added drama and flair to the rooftop scene. Each landing was choreographed, timed to create moments of anticipation and awe. Guests posed for photos, their excitement amplified by the golden lights reflecting off the terrace and the ocean, completely unaware that every movement was being captured for a live feed. The drones hovered overhead, providing a perfect vantage point to capture reactions, angles, and moments that would make the HOA's impotence painfully clear. Margot's emails had escalated further, now threatening fines, legal action, even attempting to intimidate the building management. But none of it mattered. Their authority was irrelevant. I leaned against the railing, watching the crowd and letting a quiet satisfaction settle over me. I could see Ethan pacing in the lobby below, muttering to himself, glancing nervously at the security team who had been instructed to follow only my orders. Margot was likely pacing in her office, furiously typing demands that would never reach the rooftop. Their power had limits, and I had engineered this night to expose them completely. The thrill wasn't just in the spectacle. It was in knowing that the laws they thought controlled me stopped at the building entrance. It was time to introduce the next element, controlled chaos with style. I signaled to Leo, who adjusted the drone positions to create a sweeping cinematic effect, capturing multiple angles at once. Small, subtle bursts of light along the terrace's perimeter added drama, while the synchronized movement of guests across the rooftop created the illusion of choreographed motion. The helicopters added intermittent beats of anticipation, landing in perfect timing with the music. Guests cheered, raised their glasses, and laughed, entirely unaware that their every action contributed to a carefully orchestrated lesson in power reversal. Sophia whispered through my earpiece, "The HOA just called the building manager again. They're panicking. It's perfect." I smiled. Every frantic message, every failed attempt to intervene, every futile threat reinforced the narrative that authority without reach is meaningless. Ethan's face in the lobby was red with frustration. Margot's typing fingers were likely numb from fury. Meanwhile, my rooftop continued to pulse with life, energy, and audacious defiance. Some guests had begun exploring the helipads more boldly, taking selfies against the backdrop of the city and ocean. Their laughter rang out across the terrace, blending with the hum of helicopters and the rhythmic music. I moved strategically among them, guiding subtle interactions to ensure the visuals were cinematic, the energy contagious, and the narrative of HOA impotence clear. This was more than a party. It was a carefully orchestrated spectacle of rebellion, a live demonstration that planning, creativity, and audacity could outmatch bureaucracy every time. It was then that I decided to escalate further. I gave a subtle nod to Jasmine, who discreetly handed me a small remote device. The centerpiece of the terrace, a retractable lighting rig, flared to life in a carefully timed sequence, casting dynamic patterns across the ocean-facing glass and the excited guests. The effect was immediate: awe, cheers, and laughter, perfectly synchronized with the helicopter arrivals and the ongoing movement of the crowd. Each burst of light amplified the thrill of the night, making the rooftop feel like a stage set for a cinematic climax. Ethan attempted to phone the building manager again, his voice shaking slightly with desperation. Margot's texts and emails grew increasingly frantic, demanding immediate compliance, threatening fines, and invoking obscure HOA rules. But every move had already been anticipated. Security blocked any unauthorized entry, drones captured every angle, and my guests were too immersed to notice anything beyond the joy of the night. Their authority had been rendered entirely symbolic, a powerless shadow in the face of audacious execution. Guests began to interact more boldly with the space, some leaning over railings to feel the ocean breeze, others moving across the terrace in playful dares. The energy was electric, and the sense of subtle rebellion spread like wildfire. Every laugh, every surprised gasp, every raised camera phone reinforced the lesson Margot and Ethan could not teach. Control is meaningless when it cannot be exercised, and audacity always outshines rules. I moved toward the center of the rooftop, observing the scene like a director guiding a masterful performance. The alignment of helicopters, lighting, and guest movement created a visual narrative that was impossible to ignore. Every drone captured cinematic angles, every guest contributed to the spectacle, and every moment reinforced the overarching message. The HOA had no power here. Margot Emerson's authority had been rendered irrelevant, her attempts at intervention reduced to a spectacle of futility. As the night progressed, I allowed the guests to explore the terrace more freely, creating moments that felt spontaneous, yet were carefully guided to maximize drama and cinematic effect. Every movement, every laugh, every photograph contributed to a live, unfolding narrative of revenge. The thrill was subtle but palpable, a quiet understanding among the crowd that this rooftop was a domain where creativity, planning, and audacity reigned supreme. The helicopters rotated in timed intervals, landing and departing in perfect synchrony with the music and lighting. Guests marveled at each arrival, their reactions captured perfectly by the drones and cameras. Every subtle adjustment, every small flourish, reinforced the sense that the night was a controlled masterpiece, a living lesson in audacity. Margot and Ethan could only rage impotently from below, their authority confined to the lobby and office, irrelevant to the spectacle above. By now, the rooftop had become a self-sustaining ecosystem of joy, chaos, and careful choreography. Guests moved, laughed, and celebrated, while my team monitored every angle, ensuring that every visual moment reinforced the narrative of control, strategy, and revenge. The subtle bursts of light, the rhythmic music, the helicopter's rotations, and the playful daring of the crowd all blended into a cinematic whole. It was a demonstration of precision, audacity, and the art of turning authority into impotence. Finally, I paused at the edge of the terrace, looking out at the ocean and the city skyline, feeling the breeze ruffle my hair and listening to the laughter of the guests. Every element of the night had come together perfectly. Margot Emerson's fury, Ethan's embarrassment, the helplessness of the HOA. They were all part of the invisible choreography that made this rooftop more than a party. It was a statement, a spectacle, and a calculated lesson in revenge. Tonight, the pinnacle had become more than a venue. It was a stage, a fortress, and a monument to audacity. The first real escalation of stunts had succeeded. The HOA's power had been neutralized completely, and the night was far from over. The night had fully settled into an almost hypnotic rhythm, but on the pinnacle rooftop, nothing was slowing down. Guests were fully immersed, moving from the helipads to the edge of the terrace, pausing to marvel at the ocean and city lights that shimmered like scattered diamonds beneath the moon. The warm breeze carried laughter and soft music, blending into a soundtrack of effortless rebellion. Every detail, from helicopter arrivals to subtle lighting patterns, was perfectly synchronized, giving the impression of spontaneity while everything was orchestrated with surgical precision. I walked among the crowd, feeling the quiet thrill of watching every element fall into place exactly as I had envisioned. Margot Emerson's fury had reached an almost palpable level below. Her emails were frantic, fragmented, and increasingly threatening, while Ethan's futile attempts to assert authority in the lobby had become almost comical. The building manager had been summoned repeatedly, only to be met with polite but firm resistance from security. Every time they tried to intervene, the result was the same: frustration, embarrassment, and humiliation. I allowed myself a brief, satisfied smile. This was the pinnacle of revenge, quiet, strategic, and utterly inescapable. It was time to escalate the evening with a series of coordinated stunts designed to dazzle guests and utterly humiliate the HOA. I signaled subtly to Leo, who adjusted the drones for maximum cinematic effect, sweeping across the terrace to capture every reaction and movement. At the same time, Sophia began coordinating the live feed and social media amplification, ensuring that any minor slip by the HOA would be captured in real time and magnified for maximum effect. Jasmine moved among the guests, subtly encouraging interactions that would create dynamic visual moments, all part of the carefully orchestrated spectacle. Guests began moving toward the center of the terrace, curious and eager as small bursts of dynamic lighting illuminated different areas. The effect was mesmerizing. Patterns of light danced across the glass railings, reflecting off the ocean and guests' expressions, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere. The helicopters punctuated the spectacle, arriving and departing in perfect timing with the music. Guests cheered, raised glasses, and captured every moment, completely unaware that their excitement and reactions were key components of the revenge being served below. Ethan attempted to phone Margot again, pacing in the lobby with red-faced desperation. She must have been yelling instructions through the phone, each more frantic than the last. But their authority stopped at the building entrance. Security politely, yet firmly, blocked any attempt to reach the rooftop. Their emails, threats, and frantic calls were meaningless here. Their power was irrelevant, and every reaction I imagined, every muttered curse, every trembling hand, added to the satisfaction coursing through me. It was time for the next level of theatrics. I triggered a subtle sequence along the terrace, a combination of controlled light flashes, synchronized music beats, and carefully timed guest interactions. The effect was immediate. Awe, laughter, and a palpable thrill rippled through the crowd. Guests posed along the edge, took photos with the helicopters, and laughed as the energy of the night crescendoed. Every element, the lights, the music, the movement of the crowd, the hovering drones, was designed to create a feeling of controlled chaos, a perfect visual demonstration of audacious planning. I moved toward the railing, observing the guests as they leaned over slightly to take in the view, feeling the thrill of height and freedom. Their excitement fed into the spectacle, creating natural cinematic moments. Every laugh, every surprised gasp, every gesture toward the helicopters and ocean reflected the triumph of strategy over authority. Margot Emerson could scream from her office, Ethan could pace in the lobby, but nothing they did could touch the rooftop. And the knowledge of that impotence was intoxicating. Some guests had begun daring one another to get closer to the helipads, posing for photos with the city and ocean in the background. The subtle thrill of breaking imaginary rules added energy to the crowd, while I moved among them, guiding interactions with just a nod or a glance. Every movement was designed to look spontaneous, while reinforcing the narrative of complete power reversal. The HOA below was blind, impotent, and completely irrelevant. A lesson being demonstrated with elegance, audacity, and style. As the night progressed further, I signaled for another subtle adjustment. The drones moved slightly higher, capturing the full expanse of the terrace, the helicopters, and the surrounding city skyline. The effect was breathtaking. Guests cheered at the visual drama, their energy contagious, while every frame reinforced the spectacle of rebellion. I watched Ethan in the lobby, muttering angrily into his phone, face red, hands trembling, utterly powerless. Margot Emerson's emails had reached near hysteria by now, filled with threats and demands that would never be enforced. I allowed a quiet smile to cross my face. Every detail of the night, the helicopters, the lighting, the crowd, the music, the drones, had been orchestrated perfectly. Guests were immersed, oblivious to the underlying orchestration, their reactions naturally adding to the spectacle. Every laugh, every gasp, every raised camera phone reinforced the humiliation of the HOA below, turning their impotent fury into an invisible but undeniable victory for me. It was time to introduce the next phase, subtle theatrics to make the rooftop feel even more alive. Small bursts of synchronized lights created the illusion of motion across the terrace, and guests instinctively moved toward the dramatic effects. The helicopters punctuated each movement, their rotors slicing through the night air like perfectly timed beats. Guests clapped, laughed, and cheered, completely immersed in the experience. I observed from the railing, satisfied, knowing that each reaction was another nail in the coffin of HOA authority. Ethan attempted one final direct approach, running toward the lobby security with a sense of urgency. But every move had been accounted for. Security blocked the approach politely, and he could do nothing. Margot's instructions, frantic and desperate, were meaningless. The reality was clear. This rooftop, these guests, and this night were entirely beyond the reach of petty bureaucracy. Their authority had been neutralized, their power rendered symbolic, and their frustration was a silent chorus that added to my quiet satisfaction. By the 6th hour, the rooftop had reached a rhythm that felt effortless yet deliberate. Guests laughed, danced, marveled at the helicopters, and explored every corner of the terrace. The energy was contagious, feeding itself naturally, while I moved strategically to ensure every interaction contributed to the cinematic spectacle. The combination of lighting, music, helicopters, and guest movement created a visual narrative of total audacity and defiance. Margot and Ethan below could do nothing but rage impotently, each failed attempt reinforcing the lesson that authority without reach is meaningless. I took a moment to observe the ocean, the city lights, and the movement of guests across the terrace. The feeling of control, the thrill of having executed such a carefully orchestrated plan, and the satisfaction of watching the HOA's impotent panic all blended into a sense of quiet triumph. Every element had been considered, every detail accounted for, and the rooftop had become a living stage of revenge, strategy, and audacious celebration. Tonight, the pinnacle was more than a rooftop. It was a monument to calculated defiance, a cinematic demonstration of audacity, and a lesson that rules without reach are meaningless. The guests, oblivious to the underlying orchestration, were participants in an unforgettable spectacle, while Margot Emerson and Ethan could only watch, powerless. The night was far from over, and the best moments of revenge were still unfolding. By the 7th hour, the rooftop had transformed into a breathtaking arena of audacity. The pinnacle shimmered under the moonlit sky, the ocean reflecting golden city lights, and every guest moving through the terrace seemed to exist in perfect harmony with the night. Laughter, conversation, and the subtle rhythm of music pulsed through the air, blending seamlessly with the gentle hum of helicopter rotors. It was a controlled chaos that felt entirely spontaneous, yet every movement had been choreographed for maximum cinematic effect and psychological impact. I walked among the guests, observing reactions, adjusting minor details, and feeling the quiet thrill of knowing every moment was contributing to the humiliation of Margot Emerson and her husband Ethan below. Margot's fury had escalated to almost unbearable levels. Her emails had shifted from angry threats to desperate ultimatums, each more frantic than the last. Ethan's futile attempts to enforce compliance were almost theatrical. He paced the lobby like a man trapped in invisible chains, muttering to himself and calling the building manager repeatedly. Every failed attempt only reinforced the reality that the HOA's authority ended at the building entrance. My satisfaction grew quietly as I imagined their helplessness, the perfect complement to the spectacle unfolding above. It was time for the final peak, the moment that would make this rooftop not just memorable, but unforgettable. I signaled subtly to Leo, who adjusted the drones for a sweeping cinematic panorama, capturing the entirety of the terrace, the helicopters, and the sparkling city skyline. Sophia coordinated social media posts and live feeds, ensuring that any attempt by the HOA to intervene would be broadcast to an invisible audience, amplifying their humiliation. Jasmine moved gracefully among the guests, subtly guiding them toward key areas, enhancing visual drama without anyone realizing the choreography behind it. Guests were fully immersed, leaning over the terrace, taking photos, exploring the helipads, and marveling at the city and ocean horizon. Their energy was electric, feeding the spectacle naturally. I moved strategically among them, guiding interactions with a nod or glance, ensuring that every moment contributed to the narrative of defiance and audacious planning. Each burst of laughter, every gasp of awe, every raised camera phone reinforced the silent message to the HOA. Their power meant nothing here. I activated the next stage of the spectacle, a series of synchronized light displays along the terrace perimeter, timed perfectly with subtle shifts in the music. The effect was mesmerizing. Reflections danced across the glass railings and ocean, helicopters' lights punctuated the scene, and the guests responded with awe, clapping, cheering, and raising glasses. The visual drama was intoxicating, creating an almost cinematic moment that made the night feel larger than life. The rooftop had become a stage, and every participant unwittingly performed in a story of audacious revenge. Ethan, still trying to assert authority, approached the lobby security team again, his voice strained, face flushed, hands trembling. But every attempt was neutralized politely yet firmly. Margot's frantic instructions, desperate emails, and repeated calls were useless. Their power was confined to the office and the lobby, impotent against the carefully orchestrated spectacle above. Every movement of the guests, every burst of light, every helicopter rotation was a reminder that authority without reach is meaningless. As the night progressed, I introduced a subtle but powerful element. Guests were invited to interact with the retractable terrace features, moving lightweight decorative panels to create shifting pathways and angles. The result was a dynamic, visually striking effect, as if the terrace itself were alive and responding to the crowd. Laughter and awe filled the air as guests explored, posing for photos and capturing moments on their devices. Each reaction reinforced the audacity of the night and the impotent fury of the HOA below. The helicopters rotated with perfect timing, each landing choreographed to maximize drama. Guests cheered as new arrivals disembarked, adding energy and movement to the terrace. Drones captured sweeping panoramic views, highlighting the scale of the party and the impossibility of HOA intervention. Margot Emerson's frustration must have been palpable. Her power had been reduced to impotent typing and shouting at a phone, while Ethan's attempts at intervention were comically ineffective. The reality of their impotence was almost tangible. I moved to the edge of the terrace, observing the crowd and the surrounding cityscape. Every guest was absorbed in the moment, fully engaged, oblivious to the orchestration behind it. Each laugh, each gasp, each raised camera phone was a reinforcement of the central lesson. Authority is meaningless without execution, and audacity paired with careful planning will always triumph over petty rules. The thrill of seeing my plan reach its peak was intoxicating, a quiet satisfaction that only grows with careful, patient orchestration. The final sequence of the night was subtle but dramatic. I signaled for a gradual increase in lighting and music intensity, timed perfectly with synchronized helicopter movements and drone sweeps. The terrace became a moving canvas of light, sound, and motion, the guests at the center of a cinematic spectacle. Their excitement, laughter, and awe created a natural crescendo that amplified the humiliation of the HOA below. Every frantic call, every impotent email, every futile attempt at control was countered silently by the unfolding beauty and chaos above. As the night reached this final climax, the sense of satisfaction was complete. Every element, the helicopters, the lighting, the music, the dynamic terrace interactions, the guests' reactions, was orchestrated perfectly. Margot Emerson and Ethan were powerless, their authority confined to a building they could no longer influence. The rooftop had become a monument to audacity, strategy, and meticulous planning, a living demonstration of how rules and bureaucracy can be outmaneuvered with creativity and courage. The guests, still fully immersed, laughed, posed, explored, and marveled, their excitement feeding the energy of the night. The subtle, deliberate choreography ensured that every reaction was captured for maximum effect, reinforcing the lesson of total reversal of power. The pinnacle had become a fortress of freedom and a stage of cinematic revenge. Margot Emerson's fury, Ethan's embarrassment, and the impotent HOA attempts below were now merely background noise to the spectacle of audacious triumph above. By the end of the 7th hour, the rooftop had reached the peak of energy and visual drama. Guests were exhausted, but exhilarated. Helicopters rotated perfectly, the city sparkled below, and the ocean reflected every light and movement. The night had become a living, breathing monument to strategy, creativity, and revenge. Authority without reach had been humiliated, and the rooftop had delivered a lesson in audacity that would linger far beyond the event itself. Standing at the edge, I let the quiet satisfaction settle over me. The final stage of the rooftop revenge had unfolded perfectly. Margot Emerson and Ethan could rage, threaten, and panic, but nothing they did mattered. Tonight, the pinnacle had proven that audacity, careful planning, and precise execution could completely neutralize authority. And the night wasn't just memorable, it was legendary. The final hour of the night had arrived, and the rooftop of the pinnacle was alive with an energy that felt unstoppable. Guests had fully immersed themselves in the audacity of the evening, laughing, posing for photos, dancing lightly, and marveling at the city lights shimmering across the ocean. Every helicopter rotation, every subtle burst of light, and every carefully orchestrated movement contributed to a spectacle that was cinematic, dramatic, and unforgettable. The terrace felt like its own universe, a space where the rules of the world below no longer applied, and the HOA's authority had been completely neutralized. Margot Emerson and Ethan were now desperate. Their emails had shifted from threats to pleading, each message dripping with frustration. Ethan had finally given up attempting direct intervention, his face pale and hands shaking as he paced in the lobby below. Margot's furious typing must have left her exhausted, her fingers worn raw, yet none of it mattered. Their control had ended at the doors of the building, and everything above, from helicopters to the carefully choreographed terrace chaos, was beyond their reach. Every moment of their impotence was amplified by the rooftop spectacle, a quiet, almost artistic humiliation that no amount of shouting could undo. I moved to the center of the terrace, surveying the crowd with satisfaction. The guests were still exploring every corner, laughing and interacting, their energy feeding the rhythm of the night. Leo's drones captured sweeping cinematic angles, Sophia coordinated the live feeds, and Jasmine subtly guided guests toward visually striking positions. Everything had been choreographed to perfection, from the smallest lighting adjustment to the timing of helicopter landings, creating the ultimate visual narrative. Audacity and meticulous planning, completely overpowering bureaucracy and petty rules. It was time for the final, undeniable statement. I gave a subtle signal, and the last phase of the lighting rig activated. A series of cascading beams, synchronized to music and helicopter movements, creating a wave of color and motion across the terrace. The effect was immediate. Guests cheered, clinked glasses, and gasped at the visual drama. The terrace seemed alive, the city and ocean reflecting every movement, every color, every laugh. The spectacle reached its peak, leaving no doubt about who controlled the rooftop and who had been humiliated below. Ethan attempted one last desperate move, racing toward the lobby manager to demand compliance, but security blocked his path instantly. Margot, realizing her fury and threats were meaningless, likely screamed into the phone in frustration. But here, on the rooftop, her power was null. Every laugh, every surprised reaction, every raised phone capturing the moment reinforced the lesson. Authority without reach is impotent. My quiet satisfaction deepened as I watched their futile panic unfold. The guests, oblivious to the orchestration behind the scenes, moved freely across the terrace, exploring the helipads, leaning over the edges, posing for photos and laughing with delight. Each reaction, each raised camera phone, each burst of joy added to the cinematic tableau, enhancing the humiliation of the HOA below, without anyone above realizing it. The feeling of control, the thrill of having orchestrated the perfect revenge, and the satisfaction of watching bureaucracy fail at every turn merged into a quiet, powerful victory. To add the final flourish, I activated a subtle pyrotechnic display, controlled, safe, and perfectly timed with the music and helicopters. Light reflected across the glass terrace, shimmering on the ocean, and guests paused, mouths open in awe, capturing the moment for posterity. It was the perfect conclusion to the visual and emotional arc of the night. Every gasp, every cheer, every smile was a testament to careful planning, audacity, and strategy. Margot Emerson's impotent fury below contrasted sharply with the joy and freedom above, a silent but unmistakable victory. The helicopters continued to rotate, the last guests arriving and departing seamlessly, adding layers of excitement and movement. Every landing, every takeoff, every interaction had been timed to maximize cinematic effect. The rooftop had become a living, breathing stage for a lesson in audacity, and every guest was unwittingly part of that performance. Margot and Ethan had no ability to intervene, no authority that mattered, and every futile attempt only amplified the quiet satisfaction of revenge. As the night drew to a close, I walked along the terrace, acknowledging guests, exchanging smiles, and observing the flow of the crowd. Their energy had remained high, laughter unbroken, and excitement unwaning. Every detail, the helicopters, lighting, music, and choreography, had contributed to a single, undeniable truth. Audacity, preparation, and courage triumph over petty rules and bureaucracy every time. The HOA had been humiliated, their authority nullified, their power irrelevant. I paused at the edge of the terrace, looking out at the city skyline, the ocean, and the last departing helicopters. The guests continued to laugh, take photos, and marvel, their energy a living testament to the success of the night. Every carefully orchestrated moment had unfolded flawlessly. Margot Emerson's impotent rage and Ethan's frustration below were the final pieces of a tableau that showcased strategy, creativity, and precise execution. The rooftop had become a monument to audacity, freedom, and revenge. Finally, I gathered the guests near the center, raising a glass in quiet celebration. The energy was jubilant, yet controlled, perfectly reflecting the triumph of the night. The lights gradually softened, music transitioned to a calm melody, and the terrace seemed to exhale after hours of vibrant energy. Every guest had been part of the spectacle, contributing naturally to the narrative, and every angle, every drone shot, every reaction captured the essence of victory over bureaucracy. As the last guest departed, I took a final moment to look over the pinnacle terrace. The night had been executed flawlessly. Helicopters, lights, music, and guests all working together to create a living statement of defiance. The HOA's authority had been neutralized completely, their frustration rendered impotent, and their humiliation undeniable. The rooftop, the city lights, and the ocean below reflected not just a party, but a carefully orchestrated masterpiece of revenge, strategy, and audacity. Standing at the edge one last time, I allowed a quiet smile. The night had been unforgettable, not for chaos, not for confrontation, but for the perfect, precise orchestration of audacity and strategy. The pinnacle had become a symbol, a testament to the power of planning, courage, and creativity over petty authority. Margot, Emerson, and Ethan had been outmaneuvered completely, their power rendered meaningless, and the rooftop stood as the ultimate stage for a lesson they would never forget. Tonight, the revenge was complete.